What would you think if a man stood in a British courtroom, under oath, and couldn't immediately confirm the birth dates of his own children? Not a rumor, not a source close to the matter, not a clip cut for maximum embarrassment. This unfolded in a room built for precision, where every answer is weighed, every pause is noticed, and every detail becomes part of the record. A setting where emotion is allowed, but ambiguity is expensive. It was a routine question, administrative, procedural, almost dull on paper. The kind of thing most parents answer without even reaching for memory. And yet, when the question landed, the room didn't move forward. It stalled. Monday morning in London, Prince Harry returned to the United Kingdom. But not as a working royal, not as someone visiting the palace, not as a public figure dropping in for ceremony or symbolism. He came as a plaintiff, another appearance in a long legal campaign against the tabloid press, a battle he's framed for years as a fight for privacy, dignity, and the safety of his family. And somewhere between prepared statements and carefully assembled timelines, something unplanned happened, something so ordinary it became unsettling. Because the question wasn't clever. It wasn't designed to humiliate him. It wasn't a trap disguised as protocol. The judge asked him to confirm the full birth dates of his two children, Archie and Lilibet, simply as part of verification under oath. And Harry hesitated. Then hesitated again. You can explain a pause in 100 ways. Courtrooms do that to people. Stress does that to people. Fatigue does that to people. Sometimes a mind just blanks, even on the things that matter most. But there are moments when silence doesn't feel like forgetting. It feels like something shifting beneath the surface. That's where this story actually begins. Not with a headline, not with a gossipy punchline, but with a crack. A small crack, but visible. The space between the man Harry says he is now and the version of himself he's still trying to protect. Because strip away the titles, the security arguments, the public history, and you're left with a human reality. A father asked to confirm something fundamental in a room where uncertainty echoes. And when he finally answered, it wasn't just the words that people noticed. It was the delay, the atmosphere, the way the moment lingered even after the court moved on. So what happened in that pause? Was it simple anxiety? A mind under strain? A man trying to avoid over-confirming private details in open court? Or did the hesitation reveal something deeper, something Harry himself might not fully control? To understand why that question landed so hard, you have to rewind, not to childhood, not to royal history, but to the start of that day, to the walk into the building and the mood that followed him like weather. Harry arrived without the familiar signals that used to surround him. No public family presence, no careful photo op choreography, no visible spectacle. Just a quiet entrance that looked less like confidence and more like obligation. He didn't smile, not when he stepped out of the car, not when journalists leaned forward for a reaction, not when the heavy doors closed behind him. He looked like someone who wasn't there to win a moment, but to get through one. And that distinction matters. Because whatever people think of his lawsuits, they aren't casual. They're part of a larger pattern. Years of claims about surveillance, intrusion, and press tactics that he believes damaged his life in ways the public doesn't fully grasp. This case, in particular, wasn't described as one article or one photograph. It was presented as a system: voicemail interception, tracking, private information, the slow accumulation of violations that turn ordinary life into something you can't relax inside. Inside the courtroom, the tone wasn't theatrical. It was measured, procedural, clinical. Paperwork, exhibits, lawyers speaking in careful steps, a judge moving through the architecture of the case. What happened, when it happened, what can be proven, what can't. And as the documents were brought forward, there was a strange tension in the room, the sense that this wasn't just about the press. It was about how a person remembers a life that's been lived under pressure. Because this is what court does. It forces memory to become material. It demands dates, sequences, specifics. It asks you to turn your lived experience into something that can survive scrutiny. Harry listened. He nodded sometimes. He kept his posture controlled, but the weight of the evidence built quietly, line by line. Not just what was taken, but what he believes he was never allowed to fully own: privacy, control, normality, even the ability to hold an experience without it being turned into content. Then the questions started: identification, verifications, timelines, foundational things that look harmless until you're the one answering. And then the judge looked up and asked the question, "Can you confirm the full birth dates of your children, please?" The silence didn't crash in like a dramatic movie moment. It arrived gradually, like the room realized, in real time, that the answer wasn't coming right away. You expect nerves in court. You expect careful phrasing. You even expect a moment of discomfort on personal subjects. But you don't expect that kind of stillness. Not from someone who has spoken publicly about fatherhood as a central part of his identity. Not from a man who has described himself as fiercely protective, deeply involved, determined to do things differently. The court didn't gasp. That's not how serious rooms react. Instead, it was subtle: a shift in posture, the slight pause of pens, the flicker of attention that says, "Wait, what's happening?" Harry blinked, looked down, shifted his weight. Still nothing. And suddenly, the simplest question became the most uncomfortable moment of the morning, not because it was scandalous, but because it was so basic, because it was the kind of answer you're supposed to carry without effort. He was asked again to confirm the full birth dates. That's when theories start forming, whether anyone admits it or not. Was he overwhelmed? Was he trying to protect the exact dates from becoming part of a public narrative? Was he choosing caution? But here's the problem. Caution has a texture. Strategy has a rhythm. This didn't feel like controlled withholding. It felt like something slipping. Eventually, he answered, slowly, carefully, one date, then the other. And technically, that should have closed the moment, but it didn't. Because by then, the delay had already done its work. It planted a question that doesn't disappear just because the court moves forward. How does a person who speaks so much about protecting his children hesitate when asked to confirm their beginnings? Again, it's possible to be a loving parent and still blank under pressure. That's real life. But the courtroom isn't built for real life. It's built for credibility. And credibility is shaped not just by what you say, but how quickly reality arrives when you're asked to produce it. The judge didn't comment. The lawyers didn't linger. The case continued. But something in the room had changed, because what came next made that earlier hesitation feel less random and more revealing. Minutes later, Harry was asked to read aloud a section from his own filing, not an opponent's claim, not a hostile interpretation. His words, already prepared, already submitted, already part of the case. He began evenly, measured pace, legal seriousness, the voice of a man trying to keep emotion from shaping the delivery. And then he reached a line that landed differently when spoken than when printed. In many ways, I've struggled to form consistent memories around the early days of both my children's lives. My mind has been fogged by trauma, by flashbulbs, by fear. When he said it, the earlier pause suddenly had context. Not an excuse, not a neat explanation, but context. Because if someone is telling a court, under oath, that trauma blurred the earliest chapter of his children's lives, then the birth date hesitation stops looking like a random stumble and starts looking like a symptom. And that is hard to hear, no matter what you think of him. Those early days are supposed to feel vivid for most parents. First nights, first routines, the strange clarity that comes from exhaustion and joy colliding. But if your life is lived under constant conflict, fear of intrusion, legal stress, relentless coverage, your mind can file those moments differently. It can dull them, fragment them, protect you by making the edges less sharp. Still, explanation doesn't erase contradiction. Because Harry's public identity since stepping away from royal duties has leaned heavily on fatherhood, the idea that he left to protect his family, to give his children a better and safer life, to break a cycle. So what does it mean when the same man tells a court he can't form consistent memories of their early days? That question doesn't accuse him of not loving his children. It challenges something else: the stability of the narrative he's built. and the reliability of memory inside a legal fight that depends on memory. And the day wasn't done, because the most corrosive moments in court aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes it's not a dramatic cross-examination. Sometimes it's a calm witness who doesn't sound angry at all, just certain. Later, another witness appeared, unexpected to some observers, composed to everyone in the room. Not a royal figure, not a headline magnate, not someone who looked like they'd come to make a scene. She had worked in proximity to the media world involved in the case. Her connection wasn't flashy, but it mattered. She wasn't there to insult Harry. She didn't need to. She simply described what she remembered. She was questioned about a particular article from years earlier, an item Harry's team argued could only have been produced through unlawful intrusion. The timeline mattered. The implication mattered. The claim was straightforward. The press could only have known certain details if they'd accessed private information. But the witness offered another pathway, something messier, more ordinary, and harder to litigate. She said she had overheard information being discussed openly at a private lunch between freelance journalists. Not hacking, not intercepted messages, just loose talk. Names and details passed casually, the way information often moves in media circles when people assume nobody important is listening. And then came the part that matters most in court. She placed it on a timeline that didn't match Harry's version. Not by a dramatic margin, not by years, but enough to matter. Because when your case depends on sequence, what could have been known and when, it doesn't take a massive contradiction to damage credibility. It takes a small one that seems believable. And she sounded believable, calm, specific, unemotional. The kind of witness who doesn't perform certainty, she simply has it. That's when the case begins to wobble, not because Harry is necessarily lying, but because memory becomes the weak link. And once you introduce that possibility, everything becomes vulnerable. If memory is blurred here, why not there? If a date can shift in one place, what else shifts with it? This wasn't a jury trial. It wasn't about swaying 12 people with emotion. It was a judge, one set of eyes, one assessment of reliability, one decision about what feels solid and what feels unstable. The witness continued, offering details that aligned with places, dates, and ordinary logistics, things that, earlier in the day, Harry had struggled to retrieve quickly. And that contrast didn't need to be stated out loud to be felt. Then the witness was asked a final question, something that pointed toward another conversation, another moment. And she stopped. Not dramatically, not defensively. She simply declined to elaborate. The judge asked why. And her answer, quiet, controlled, hit the room harder than a loud accusation ever could. I don't think he remembers saying it. That line doesn't prove anything on its own. It isn't evidence by itself. But it does something powerful in a courtroom. It reframes the entire day around one theme: memory, and what happens when memory can't carry the weight being placed on it. That was the undertone beneath everything. Not just privacy, not just press ethics, not just legal boundaries. It was the possibility that Harry isn't only fighting the tabloids, he's fighting the blur, the erosion that comes from living too long inside conflict. And that's where the tragedy sits, not in spectacle, not in embarrassment, not in the kind of drama people cheer for online. It's in the image of a man whose life has been documented with brutal persistence. Every mistake, every relationship, every step, standing in a room that demands clarity and struggling to produce it on command. You'd assume someone raised under that level of scrutiny would have a memory reinforced like armor. Instead, the day suggested something else. That constant pressure doesn't always strengthen memory. Sometimes it distorts it. Sometimes it breaks it into pieces you can't reliably reassemble when someone points at a moment and says, "Confirm." He hesitated on birth dates. He faltered on timeline certainty. He read his own words with the strain of someone hearing them again for the first time, as if the person who wrote them lived in a slightly different mind. And that's the point that lingers after the courtroom empties. When you enter a legal process, your story stops belonging to you. It becomes material. Silence that lasts just a beat too long, words that echo back harsher than you expected. The verdict still hasn't arrived. The court will weigh documents, testimony, and credibility. It will decide what holds and what doesn't. But something already shifted that day, and it has nothing to do with a final ruling. Because once the public sees uncertainty, once they see that even the most personal facts can hesitate in someone's mouth, the narrative changes. Not because people are fair, but because people are human. They read meaning into pauses. They treat hesitation like a confession. They build stories around cracks. And maybe the most unsettling possibility is this: Harry came to court to reclaim control over his narrative. So what happens next? We'll find out when the legal process ends. But the larger question is already here. Was this only about privacy? Or was it about what years of pressure do to a person's memory and what it costs when memory is the foundation of your truth?